it has been started.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here. Hopefully everyone can see my screen now. And I'm excited to be talking about this topic. It's really important, and I know that I know it's something that gets asked about a lot. It can seem daunting, trying to start a legal proceeding to correct your identity documents. But hopefully after today, it won't seem so scary, and you'll actually think, I can do that. That's pretty easy, and go out and get your documents corrected relatively quickly. So here we go. So the topics today of what we're going to cover, we're going to talk about just an overview of the name change and gender marker correction process, the documents you need to gather kind of before and as you're filing the petition, additional information kind of relevant specifically for minors. And then once you have the court order, what do you do with that? So with that, let's move on to kind of just the general process overview. So it's not a complicated process. The first step is to gather all the documentation that you need, and then prepare your petition. Then you'll choose the proper venue, meaning which court you're going to file in, and then you file the documents with the court. At that point, you wait, and the court may ask you to come for a hearing, in which they may ask you a couple questions. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Or they may just go ahead and grant your petition without asking for a hearing. And then once they grant it, they'll give you a signed order. And that's what you're going to use when you go to update all your actual legal documents. So what documents do you need when you are preparing the petition and looking to file for your name change or gender marker correction? And so depending on whether you're just filing for a name change or filing for both, or just filing for the gender marker correction, the exact documents you need will change. But in general, what you're going to need is the petition, which is essentially your formal request to the court for what you're seeking, and in this case, it would be a name change or a gender marker correction or both. You're going to need supporting documents, so exhibits that go along with your petition, and common ones include things like a letter from your medical provider, a letter from your therapist. For adults, fingerprints have to be submitted. If you have a criminal history, a copy of that, things like that. And then you also need to draft an order that gets submitted to the court, and that'll have some blanks in it for the court to fill out. But that's what they actually sign and give you, and that's the document that ultimately you're hoping to get from the court. So the first thing and the most important thing is the petition. This, like I said, is your request to the court. This is actually my petition with some information blacked out that I submitted a few years ago. Basically what this document says, and this is not the whole document, but similar to what's on here, is it just lists out a bunch of information about myself, my current name, date of birth, where you were born, what your home address is, who you are for, Social Security, driver's license. And then it'll have some information about what you want. So generally the next page would say, I'm seeking to change my name from, X to Y, and I'm seeking to change my gender marker from, in this case, it was male to female, or female to male. So unfortunately in Texas right now, you cannot get a gender neutral gender marker. The only gender markers that are recognized by the state of Texas are either male or female. That does not mean you can't get that on some of your documents, and we'll talk about that later with like passports and things like that, can actually have different gender markers than your driver's license. But for this order and this petition, it needs to be either male or female. Um, all right, so that's the petition. It's basically, a legal document you're going to submit to the court. So the next thing you need to do is gather all the supporting documents that go with your petition. For a gender marker change, you have to have a letter from a doctor. That letter typically states something like, this doctor has seen you, they've examined you, that they know that you're receiving treatment, the proper clinical treatment for gender transition, and then that they believe it's in your best interest for the court to grant a name change or gender marker correction. Now, there aren't specific requirements of what procedures you have to have had to get a gender marker correction. And that's not required. All you have to have is really a kind of a recommendation from a doctor. So that could just be that they're seeing you for therapy, that they're discussing hormones with you, that they're, whatever has happened, whatever they, feel they need to share. But it's a really basic letter. And as long as they have those kind of 3 points in it, it should be sufficient. For adults, you have to get fingerprinted. And that is something you can actually do on your own if you get the fingerprint cards from the county's clerk's office, or you can go to a fingerprint service and they will fingerprint you for you. At the service, they charge you, some kind of fee. I can't remember what it was. When I went, it wasn't too expensive, but there is a fee associated with it. It is important that your fingerprints are done right, because they will get submitted for a background check. And if they are not, I guess, legible by whoever's doing the background check, then your application could get rejected. So that is the one thing that counsels in favor of going to a service rather than doing it on your own, is that they know kind of what the requirements are and are more likely to get that done correct the first time. If you have a criminal history, you also have to disclose that to the court, and that's whether you're a minor or an adult. Having a criminal history does not preclude you from getting your name changed or your gender marker corrected, but it does place some additional restrictions, and it leaves it up to the judge a little bit more on whether they think they should grant it or not. Generally, those restrictions are: have you served whatever time you were supposed to serve, or did you satisfy probation? And how long ago was it that you either last served whatever penalty that you had, or that you completed your probation. And this is not for minor traffic tickets or anything like that. This is if you had felonies or higher class misdemeanors, that you would have to disclose that. And then finally, there's a document called a statement of inability to pay court costs. If you are someone who is financially strapped, and are unable to afford the court fees. The court fees are usually for a name and gender marker around $300, maybe a little more, to file. If you can't afford that, you can complete this form that the court actually provides, and it basically you list out your assets and your liabilities and how much income you bring in. And if you can show there that essentially you don't have enough income to cover an additional $300, then the court should grant you the ability to file without having to pay those court costs. Now for minors, there's slightly different documentation. You still need the medical letter. Again, it's not required for a name change only, but for a gender marker correction, you need the medical letter, and that is pretty similar in terms of content. The next document you definitely need is a consent of the child, and that's if your child is 10 years old or older. They have to consent to the name change and gender marker correction. So there's basically a letter that says, state, legal name. I understand that, my parents are filing for a, change of my name and a correction of my gender marker. I consent to this filing. I desire for my name to be updated to this and my gender marker to be updated to this. And I, sign this, freely and willfully. And then they sign it. If they are under 10, so if they're 9 years old or younger, then you don't need the consent. I think that applies in fairly rare cases in which I've seen people who have filed for these before the age of 10, but if you are, then you don't need the consent. And then if there has been a divorce or any other custody agreement or any other kind of agreement that is, the court has basically been instituted into the parent relationship. So you've had what's called a SAPSR or suit affecting the parent-child relationship, then you need to disclose that to the court. And that's because oftentimes the court now has some vested interest in the well-being of the child, and they need to be aware of that when they are deciding to grant or to deny a petition for a name or a gender marker correction. All right. So then the last thing for minors is that there has to be parental consent. And so actually, as a parent of a minor who's filing for a name and gender marker correction, it is the parent that is the petitioner who's asking the court for this, not the minor themselves. Whereas as an adult, you're filing on your own behalf. Here, your parents are filing. So if both parents consent to the change and they can both file as co-petitioners, that is the best case scenario. That makes it the easiest for the court, that makes it the easiest for you. Essentially, you would both sign the petition, you would both list your names, addresses, relevant information in the petition to verify your identity, that this is your child, the child's information, and then the request for what you're looking for, whether that's a gender marker, name, etc. If one parent does not consent, it does not mean that you cannot update the gender marker or name. It just makes it slightly more difficult. I would recommend if there is not, both parents aren't consenting, then I would recommend getting an attorney because it does make it a little more tricky and you have to follow very specific notice requirements. Essentially what happens is you file your petition, you have to post a notice that it has been filed to a public forum or provide notice directly to, if you know the address of the other parent, you have to provide notice directly to them. They then get a period of time to decide whether or not to challenge the petition. And if they choose to challenge it, then it's no longer an uncontested filing, and you will have essentially a court proceeding to determine whether or not you are allowed to proceed with this name and gender marker correction. I get asked sometimes from kids whether or not you can update this on your own without your parents' consent. Generally, the answer is no. There's a couple exceptions for people who are emancipated minors, but otherwise, generally, no, you cannot do this until the age of majority without parental consent. Okay, so the order. So this is what we were talking about earlier. Again, this is my order from a few years ago as I submitted it to the court before it was signed. And you see here, we leave some blanks in here for the judge to fill in on the day that they actually sign this. It basically says here what happened on the day, and this was filed in Dallas County, so I had to appear in court. In other counties, you might not. And we'll talk about that in a second. But basically, it lists out very similar information to what was in the petition. And then it says that the court found that, it was appropriate, that I wasn't, a criminal, I wasn't evading credit or some kind of debts by changing my name, and that they found it was in my best interest or in the court's interest to grant my name change and gender marker correction. And then the judge signs it, and they hand it to you signed, and you turn it into the clerk's office, which is usually just down the hall from the courtroom. So if you have to go to court, that'll be generally the process. You walk in on the day of, you check in with the bailiff. They will have you sit in the gallery, and you wait and listen until your action is called. When your action is called, you will walk up to the table on the other side of the bar in the courtroom, and you will stand there and address the judge with honorifics. So you'll say, Your Honor. You will be very respectful. You'll stand when speaking. You'll ask if if you need to approach the judge. You'll ask if you're allowed to approach. And essentially, the judge may ask you a couple questions. So in this instance, the judge asked me, my name, confirmed who I was, confirmed my birthday, and then asked me to tell them why I wanted the name and gender marker correction. And I gave, a short statement, and then the judge said, thank you, and signed the document. It's usually pretty simple. I know it can be intimidating to be in court, especially if it's not something you do regularly. But know that depending on the venue, and we're going to talk about venue in a second, if you get called into court in one of the venues that I would recommend, those judges are usually on your side. They want to help you, and if they're there doing that, it's asking questions. It's just because that is the rules in that particular jurisdiction, and they need to get it on the record so that they can appropriately grant your petition. Okay, so let's move on to kind of the filing. Where do you pick, and what do you do? So where to file? For a gender marker correction in Texas, almost always file in Travis County. And I say that because Travis County is the friendliest county in Texas for gender marker corrections. They nearly always grant them unless there's a significant flaw in the petition. They are a very Democratic district, and you don't have kind of some of the political backlash that you can get in some of the other counties in Texas if they do grant a name or gender marker correction for a trans petitioner. For a name change only, you can file in Travis County, but you're also can also file in your own county. And typically, it's not an issue for a name change only to file in most counties in Texas. Now, that's not always true, and it would be wise to consult a lawyer in your area before you file. But for most counties, a name change only can be filed wherever you live, or if you're filing for a minor, wherever the minor lives. And then once you filed, you may have to appear in court. Travis County typically does not require you to appear in court. They typically decide what we would call is on the papers. So you've submitted your documents, your petition, they find that everything is there and in order, then they will, rather than calling you in, signing the document in front of you, you will get a notice from the court saying that your petition has been granted and that you can come get a copy of your order. All right. So once you have the order, what do you do next? So you need to get certified copies of the order. This is really important. Certified copies of the order are what you're going to use to update everything else in your life. And I would recommend you get at least 4 certified copies. You're going to be using them a lot. Some people might keep them, or they just might be out in the mail to various agencies all at the same time. So I would recommend having at least 4 copies. And the first thing you should do when you get your order is go to the Social Security office and update your Social Security card. It's not that difficult. If there are, moms on here that changed their name when they got married, then you know the process. You take there, you took a marriage license. Here, you take this order. You go pull a number. You sit there. They'll call you up, and it doesn't take too long. They read the order. They'll type in new information. You'll keep the same Social Security number, but they'll issue you a new card. And then that comes in the mail not too long later. For people who have state issued IDs, whether that's a driver's license or just a general ID card, the next thing you should do is go to the Department of Public Safety or the DMV and get that updated. And I recommend these 2 first because those are the ones used the most often. And having both of these updated, and especially the Social Security card, makes it easier to get some of these other documents updated later. So once you've done that, and you've gone to these 2 offices that you have to go to in person, most of the rest of these can be done via mail or sometimes online submission. So if you have a passport, you can submit for an updated passport, and they'll take the order from the court along with basically a passport correction form. It's found on the passport office's website. And there you can update your gender marker, you can update your name, all of that information can get updated there. You submit it in the mail with the copy of the court order and the copy of your letter from your doctor. That will go to the passport office. Once they have corrected it, they'll actually send you your documents back. So you'll get that certified copy back from the passport office, but they hold on to it while they're processing. The next document, and one that's super important for minors, is getting your birth certificate corrected. So in Texas, you can update your birth certificate if you have a court order. It's actually not well defined in law what's required to update your birth certificate, but typically what you'll see on a petition and the order issued from the court is that you're requesting an update of the gender marker / sex marker. And the reason we do that is because the Department of Vital Statistics actually refers to it as sex, not gender, whereas most other parts of the Texas state government refer to it as gender. So you want to have both in your petition and your order. And then if you do have that, then the Department of Vital Statistics will update your birth certificate. When you're requesting that, there's a form. It's fairly simple to fill out. There's a box on the form. Actually, let me see if I can, in a minute, I'll pull up the form. There's a box on the form that allows you to request a new birth certificate rather than just correcting the birth certificate. And that's what you want to do when you submit this correction. Essentially what that does is they actually strike your old birth certificate. It should not be locatable by somebody else in the future. Your new birth certificate takes the place of it. So if somebody is looking for documentation of your kind of original birth certificate, and there shouldn't be documentation of that, at least that they shouldn't be able to access it. Whereas if you just file a simple correction, then it actually just keeps a record of here was the original, here's the corrected copy. So you want to get that fully replaced. Other places you might file, tax office, if you have title to any property, they'll update it there. Your bank accounts, your credit cards, etc. And then medical insurance. And again, this is where like insurance is one of those where having your social security card already updated is really helpful. A lot of insurance companies key off of your social security number, and having that name and gender marker corrected at the social security office makes it a lot simpler to get the insurance updated. Other places you might take it to the school. So your school district should have an ability, all school districts in the state have it, an ability to submit a name change or the order from the court, as well as you should be able to submit this new birth certificate to the school, and that should update the school's records to reflect your new name and your new gender marker. You know, if you get pushback from the school, I think that there was I believe there was a previous session that Pride Frisco offered on the grievance process for students. So I would recommend kind of consulting that and potentially, you know, finding a lawyer if you need to file additional grievances or court proceedings against the school district to update it. But you shouldn't have trouble once you have both this birth certificate and the order from the court. Otherwise, this is kind of where you are. You've got everything you need, and you can go from there. Those orders are typically good for almost everything that you need to update from there. So that's basically the process. Do we have any questions, John? Have any questions come in?
Yeah, let me just show myself, and so I'm just not like talking stuff. Well, thank you, Callie, for sharing all of that. And we have a couple of questions that I'm gonna try to facilitate. So back when you were talking about the medical letters, does the doctor have to be a licensed doctor in the state in which you're petitioning? And then what types of doctors? Like there are doctors that offer telemedicine, you know, or you know, so if you can speak to that.
Yeah, so there are not, you do not have to see your doctor in the state in which you're petitioning. Many people don't live in the state in which they were born. So what happens is, like if you're trying to update your birth certificate, you have to get one of these petitions. I guess I should have mentioned this. All of this was assuming you were born in Texas. If you were born outside of Texas, you need to get, for many states, you need to get a petition filed in the state in which you were born. There are some states that will take a petition from outside of their state, but generally you need to file your petition in the state that you were born in order to update your birth certificate. And so, you know, oftentimes people live in a state that they weren't born in. They may see a doctor there. And so generally it's wherever you are living and you're seeing that doctor is sufficient. That's really what they're looking for, is that you have a licensed professional that has some sort of relationship with you that is signing off on this change.
So it could be your GP. It doesn't
Yes.
have to be a psychiatrist, right?
That's correct. So it could be a medical doctor, it could be a psychiatrist, a psychologist. Generally, it's someone you have had a relationship with. So yes, your general practitioner would be if they're willing to sign the letter, would be completely sufficient.
That's great. Like, what about from an immigrant perspective, where you may not have all your paperwork? Like myself, I don't have I was born in Saigon, Vietnam, and I didn't have my birth certificate. What do you do at that point?
Yeah, so the birth certificate's not required to do the update with your general documentation. So you can get an order from the court still. You know, you will have to ask somebody from another, who's licensed to practice in Vietnam or in another foreign country, wherever if you were have moved here from a foreign country or your birth certificate's located in a foreign country, what the process is there specifically on if you were going to try and update that birth certificate. However, for general documentation like your driver's license, any other documentation issued by the US government, the order that you are getting from the state of Texas should be sufficient to update all of that documentation.
Got it. What are some of the issues that you have seen or you can anticipate people encountering, hey, that you would advise, like, hey, follow these procedures because they're going to give you the most, tried and true, pathway to a successful, for your petition to be granted.
Yeah, so one thing I would say, a lot of people, you can go online and you can Google and you can find some forms that say, fill this out and you can submit this with the court. And those are great. I would always recommend that you get an attorney to review it, at least, even if you've completed the forms yourself. There are, services or free services that can do that, like clinics in various cities. I know Houston has one, Austin has one. We are about to start one in Dallas that the LGBT Bar is starting. Those are great places to sign up and have your documents reviewed, kind of just quickly gut checked to make sure that you haven't missed something, because the last thing you want is to submit and have it denied. So
that's a segue to my next question is, what recourse do you have if your petition is denied?
So essentially what happens if it gets denied is you'll actually just withdraw the petition, and then you'll try again. That is the best way to do it. You don't appeal typically, and they usually will say that there's some kind of error in your petition, and the best thing for you to do is just to withdraw the petition, go back and correct the error, and then try again. Now, if it continues to get denied, you may want to hire a lawyer. There have been cases that have set kind of the precedent for when you can get these things changed, what's acceptable, what the level of evidence is. And in those cases, people ended up appealing their cases. But for most people, if it gets denied, it's simply because there's some small thing that was not correct or some piece of evidence was left off, and the judge felt they couldn't grant it appropriately. And so you withdraw, you correct the error, and you refile.
Got it. Can you refile in a different county?
You can. Yes, you can. So we have definitely seen people. I've seen people who've tried to file in their home county, who got it denied, and then they sought help after that, and we withdrew the petition and then filed in Travis County.
Fantastic. What about people who, especially I'm thinking about like minors who would want to have people with them in the courtroom, because it could be like, to your point earlier, it could be very intimidating for someone who's, that's not, they don't hang out in the courtroom. And so it could be, I had my name changed, and it was very intimidating actually, to be called up and then ask, you kind of anticipate it, but when the judge is asking you, well, why do you want to change your name? And then you have to not only explain to that person, but everyone else sitting in the courtroom, because it's a public space, right? So it would have been nice to have others with me
Yeah,
Is that permissible?
it is. So specifically for minors, as I mentioned earlier, the parents are actually the ones petitioning on behalf of the minor. So
Yes.
if they have to appear in court, the parents would actually be the ones that initially get kind of called up to present. And then the minor may get asked a question, especially if they are over the age of 10 and they've submitted the consent. The judge may, then address the minor and say, and you want to have this changed? Can you explain to me why you want to have this changed? But their parents will be at the table with them there. That would be completely expected and actually would be abnormal if they weren't. Yeah.
That's a very good point. And I'll close with this question and answer it however you like. No, we know that the current Texas legislation has a lot of anti LGBTQ plus, especially anti-trans bills, and so those bills are in the process of becoming law. How does that reality either complicate matters, for this process, or what are the things that you need to kind of, do and consider if you are either a minor or a parent of a minor considering this? Should you, for example, hurry up and get your stuff, ready and kind of beat the process kind of thing, or, so if you can talk to some of that.
Yeah, so I'll say most of the bills should not affect this process, although there is one or two bills that are specifically targeting the possibility of updating a birth certificate. And so for that reason, I would recommend, as we wait to see what the outcome on those bills is going to be. I mean, the session's almost over, but we do anticipate a special session. So we'd likely know in the next week. The 29th is the last day of the official session, and then it will. Then we'll see if there's a special session. But if those bills pass, then what they do essentially is require your sex assigned at birth to be listed on your birth certificate. What's unclear at this point is, does that create a new field on birth certificate that the Department of Vital Statistics can issue, so that you have your sex assigned at birth and then whatever your current sex is? Or does that mean that the sex is not able to be changed ever? That's what's unclear from the law. It has not been really fleshed out in any of the discussion around those laws. But from that perspective, I'd say that's the one thing I'm looking at and I'm worried about from a name change, gender marker correction standpoint. The other bills that we're seeing in the session are, I think still troubling, especially for minors and for students. We're seeing, additional attacks on the ability to play in sports of the gender that you identify with. Expanding it from what was through 12th grade to now into college sports. We're seeing restrictions on providing medical care. And, I guess presumably that could include, it's unclear based on the language, whether that includes mental health care related to this, and whether that might affect the ability to get a letter from somebody, here in the state of Texas for your submission for your gender marker correction. So I think there could be some compounding effects there that we see as we watch them roll back kind of rights on trans youth, especially, but also trans adults. And I certainly think that it creates some difficulties, but I don't think it will completely eliminate the ability to get this done. And so, if you have the ability to do it now, I would recommend doing it now. If not, I don't think it's, the end of the world or the end of the opportunity to do this. It just might be a little more difficult.
Excellent. Thank you. I don't think there are any other questions, but so thank you so much, Callie, for your time. And for our audience, if they want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so you can reach out to me through my firm's website. It's butcherlegalgroup.com, or email me at my email. It's Callie@butcherlegalgroup.com. I'm always happy to answer questions or direct people to resources. You can also follow the Dallas LGBT Bar Facebook group. And we post information about events, and there'll be information about our clinic that will get posted in there. So feel free to follow us there.
Excellent. Yeah, I just wanted to post this on here so your information is clearly for everyone to see. But yeah, that sounds so exciting that, looking forward to the clinic and looking forward to just the wonderful things that you already are doing for our community and also in the future. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for our audience. And hopefully we'll have Callie on for other topics of interest for our
Yeah,
community.
I'd be happy to come back.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Stop.